The Starside Prophecy by Tirri. Chapter 1. The Hierarchy. Souls returning Starside seldom spend longer than necessary thinking about the life they were happy to leave behind, and most do not want to think about a future life either. Once free from the stern realities of life on Earth, most souls are eager to re-engage in the afterlife activities appropriate for their level of consciousness. That is what I had been doing when I was suddenly called back Starside. My name is Sarah, and as I walked up the steps of the Department of Planning, my mood was black. A newcomer named Maria was on her way out of the building. Her maiden voyage, as mine had been, would be in the form of a female. She had already lived thousands of sentient lives as fish, reptile and various animals, wild and domestic. Now it was time for her first human experience. "Hey cutie," I said, doing my best to sound cheerful. "Where are you off to?" "Well, I'm not sure yet. I have the rest of the day to make my choice. I can't decide if I want to go to the Amazon basin or some remote island in the North Sea." "Polar opposites, huh? I'm sure you'll have fun in either place." "The jungle sounds nice. I really like parrots. My guide recommends the jungle." "I love the jungle," I lied. "I had a blast when I was there. It's very pretty." "Really?" she said, her smile getting larger. "Really?" I said, forcing mine not to shrink. I had no intention of telling her something she was better off not knowing, but in an early incarnation in that region I was savaged by several members of a rival tribe who were not much older than children. My death had been terrifying and painful. As I left my body, the last thing I saw was my head on top of a stake outside the chieftain's hut. But that was a long time ago. Perhaps they were more civilized now. "I'm a bit nervous, actually," she said, swallowing. "You'll be fine, trust me. When you get back here, it will all feel just like the blink of an eye anyway." I was uncertain whether this boosted her morale or not, but she gave me a half-hearted smile before walking down the steps. Poor bitch, I thought as I made my way through the lobby. Like Maria, most souls beginning their human encounters were very naive, which meant a few rough starts and some unsettling surprises were very likely. I looked upward before entering the Department of Planning towards the apex that had not been visible from the ground for decades. In order to accommodate the fluctuating multitudes leaving for Earth and returning home again, except for Eden and Inauguration Hall, all the administrative buildings had expanded upward in limitless ascent. The technology necessary to duplicate similar structures on Earth is expected to be received sometime during the 25th century. I walked through the lobby and my ears popped as the elevator transported me up. When the doors eventually opened, I took in a deep breath before stepping into the room where the hierarchy were waiting. The Godson, Melchizedek, was dressed casually in a white linen shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbows over cream-coloured trousers. I did not want to acknowledge him and made my way across the marble floor, my heart beating forcefully towards the visitor's chair while trying to focus my attention on the sound of panpipes, hidden instruments playing from hidden recesses. The effect was intended to help keep the atmosphere soothing. Fat chance of that, I thought. I sat down before being invited to. The chair automatically enveloped my body with a soft cushioning to fit my exact form. As I moved, it moved. I decided not to acknowledge those eager that I might. Instead, I leant back, put both feet on the table and crossed my legs. I had on faded jeans, an open-neck white shirt, semi-covering a lacy bra, and a pair of red cowboy boots. I slumped down. I was about as artificially relaxed as I could be. The long rectangular table with its gold flecks and fissures of crystal was pleasing to look at. I couldn't see any seams and so assumed it had been carved out of a very large piece of granite. The centrepiece comprised several tapered candles placed in ebony candlestick holders. The aromas were complementary, musk and sandalwood. The dripping wax forming elongated talons bled into smooth, expanding pools. 4 cut crystal glasses containing water from the fountain of youth were set before us. I would have preferred vodka. A scroll of parchment lay before Melchizedek. No doubt it had my name on it. I now investigated the faces of the 3 people staring back at me. I tried to recall how many times I had sat in front of the hierarchy, as I had dubbed them. I recalled the many meticulous and tedious planning sessions I had been forced to endure, but as my attention travelled through the early Bronze Age, Cain began tapping his fingers, noticed that I should come back to the present. I wasn't certain how long I was lost in reverie, but Cain looked sufficiently miffed that it must have been a while. Although the 4 of us were well acquainted, and had been for a very long time, a plastic truce was all that was obvious. Business was business, and this was business as usual, and nothing would prevent the smooth flow of that. Melchizedek, Cain and Alusha all had my best interest at heart, but all had a bigger picture in mind, the larger agenda to be fulfilled, and would take all the time necessary to get me on board. No one knew how long the meeting would last, because no one knew how much resistance I would offer, but I wouldn't be the first to shy away from another life on a planet that I was happy to leave the last time around. "Glad to see you looking so chirpy," said Melchizedek, his tone suspiciously jovial. "I'm faking it," I responded sulkily. "Really? Why?" "You know why," I growled. "I'm not ready for another lifetime in the physical. When I am, I will let you know. I have no pending karma and you have no authority over me. I object to being summoned without the proper notice, and I want you to know that I only came today because the thought of being tracked down again struck me as rather tedious. I had other plans." "Well, you are very fortunate I endowed you with the benefit of eternal life. What you don't do today, you can always do in 3 billion years from now. Where were you off to, anyway?" "Olympus." "Olympus?" said Melchizedek, frowning. You might want to try it sometime. The gravity is marginal and the natives are friendly. It's a lot more fun than a boring day on the golf course." "I hate golf." "I know. You have always preferred fishing, haven't you?" Melchizedek averted his eyes, obviously not ready to get into a discussion about his greatest success and failure to date. I sucked in my breath and squared my shoulders, willing myself to remain nonchalant. I had rehearsed the words many times over in my head. "My darling M, if you have asked me here once again to consider another lifetime in the physical, you should heed your own sermons and know that I am under no obligation to rush. I shall be alive in some shape or form for all eternity. I do not care for the life on that inhospitable little planet you had the nerve to create. I object to the restrictions as well as the snail-like pace, and I doubly object to living on a planet where the thoughts of those surrounding me are of such poor quality. When I am ready to be imprisoned again, and who can say when that will be, I will let you know before anyone else." I maintained my slump and kept my feet on the table. I was uncomfortable, but I liked the look on Cain's face as he stared at the soles of my boots. Cain sat to the left of Melchizedek, erect as usual, and Alusha, poker face, was to his right. Melchizedek was nonplussed by my truculence and pursued the conversation without further hiatus. "Sarah, as you well know, after completing my final incarnation, along with a higher order of intelligences, I look forward to the time my creations would enter into a higher understanding of who they are and the nature of the reality they are immersed in. But as Alusha once pointed out, bestowing the pressure of the anti-force upon humanity meant that ridding the world of primitive beliefs might not be easy. To impart quantum knowledge on the earth that will allow a precise understanding of who human beings are is my goal, and I need your help." "Nice. Find someone else." Melchizedek was not deterred, and smiling he said, "Sarah, the fact that I need your help is really neither here nor there. You must return. You cannot avoid the curriculum. It's something we all go through. You have asked for my help on more than one occasion, and I complied. I am a little more judicious these days. And as far as your stupid curriculum goes, I lost interest in that a very long time ago. And do you want to know something else? If it had been up to me, I would have denied you permission to create anything and banish you to the other side of the fucking universe." "Well," said Melchizedek, laughing, I'm so very glad you're not in charge. I'll bet, I said, turning my attention to Cain. His role was to direct the meeting until a satisfactory conclusion was reached. I could feel his eyes boring into my soul. My foot began moving in short, sharp movements. Cain and I held each other's gaze like enemy gunslingers. He was dressed flamboyantly, which was odd because he chose to usually blend in like a chameleon. His tunic, made of cream silk, was of Arabic origin, and he wore a red and white checked keffiyeh secured with a black cord. "Why are you wearing a tablecloth on your head?" I inquired. "The parasites in my hair prefer the shade," he said. "Why else?" Alusha grinned, and then so did Melchizedek. Cain's comment had been intended to break the ice, but I was still on guard despite his attempts to be jocular. Cain and I did not like each other, but something akin to mutual respect strangely remained. Cain was a younger soul than I, but unlike me, he had seen all his earthly journeys as just a tiny part of an exciting and eternal exploration, and this mindset had bled through into every lifetime, apparently enabling him to fast-track the human cycles in just 82 incarnations. This was almost unheard of. Cain's role Starside was principally that of head guide of both the Department of Planning and the Department of Returns. He was also a sermonizer. Cain supervised the management of souls leaving for Earth and souls returning home again, and he moved between parishes, going where his expertise was needed. Most with his talents would consider this menial work, but Cain carried out his task cordially, going about his day as if he was just a mere mortal. I found the pretense tedious. I knew very well who he was and what his mind was capable of. Cain had lived the gamut, from hermit to handyman, head honcho to peasant, prophet to president, serf, swami and sultan. He had met every difficulty and every challenge with ease, sailing through each cycle as if riding a bike downhill with his eyes wide open, rather than uphill and blindfolded like me. Having grasped the early curriculum with ease, Cain had seldom found any of his lifetimes challenging. Therefore, his experiences had been less dramatic than those had found the cycle of rebirth difficult. I had once pointed out to Alusha that to understand the complexities of life on Earth, one had to fully experience its depths and breadths, and I didn't think Cain had, and therefore wasn't in a position to mentor any of us. "The ability to shepherd one's own consciousness is all it takes," was Cain's response when I had challenged him with the same assertion. "Your outer reality corresponds to the inner one. There is no great mystery. The Godson would not have done that to us." I had sometimes wondered whether Cain's consciousness had received a proper measure of anti-force, the tool Melchizedek created to compel humans to evolve spiritually prior to beginning their earthly lives. But he had just laughed when I had aired this concern. The Godson knows what he is doing, and besides, we are not all slow learners, Sarah. The fact that Cain had been able to move through the human cycles with ease had always been a cause for scorn rather than inspiration for me. Melchizedek had indeed created an energetic system, endowing each participating soul with the free will to create their own reality with their thoughts, but for me, and others like me, the journey had been such a trudge, and often terrifying and gruelling, that the mere thought of going back to Earth almost turned me vicious. I maintained Cain's gaze with suspicion, resentful of the fact that he was in possession of a razor-sharp focus that had taken little effort to come by, but it was for this reason that Melchizedek had promoted him to a level of jurisdiction he currently benefited from, and it was this reason he was present today. Although my growth had been slow, Cain had singled me out as having certain attributes other souls my age lacked. I was not flattered. All I knew was that his expectations of me were unreasonably high, and he thought I should be more willing to overcome my laissez-faire attitude. But I thought he had a lot to overcome too, namely his arrogance and dull, humorless demeanour. Cain had not taken his eyes off me. He was waiting for me to bring my attention back to the present moment. Melchizedek and Alusha waited patiently as well. Through a smile as phonely as only he could manage, Cain's cautionary words were as predictable as the tone accompanying them. Without bothering to ask whether I wanted to be reminded of anything, he said, Sarah, the time is ripe for you to be reminded that Earth is a training ground designed with manifestation buffers so souls are able to experiment with their thoughts without the threat of imprecise ones coming immediately alive. The constant pressure of the anti-force is designed to compel man to choose his thoughts. His actions follow, and so does his karma. For most on the journey, the pull of the conflicting force gives rise to a great deal of trial and tribulation. But everyone eventually takes possession of their mind. The means always justify the ends. Always. Melchizedek chimed in. It has been acknowledged that there are a sufficient number of souls now advanced enough to understand more about the reality they are immersed in, and this means humanity at large could be on the cusp of achieving a level of consciousness previously only known to a fortunate few. This, my love, is the reason you were asked to come here today. I didn't want to know why I was here, I just wanted to run. Running always came naturally when faced with the prospect of another lifetime. When I had first embarked on my human cycles, and for a long time after, I didn't make any waves, like a compliant sheep. But when it was time to plan a life during the dark ages of Europe, I suddenly felt that it was all too much. I felt like I was digging my own grave, again. My guide had sensed my reticence. She suggested we take a walk to ponder some of the deeper questions that she assumed would lead to my acceptance. As we walked through the botanical wonderland of Starside's outer regions, I told her I wanted to be alone for a while, in nature, under the stars, and that I'd make my way back to the Department of Planning after some solitude. A while turned out to be 7 years, 6 months and 22 days. The retrievers found me on a secluded little planet in the constellation of Taurus. 2 months after my retrieval, I found myself in the uterus of someone not much more than a child herself. I was born a girl in a remote village in the Andes mountain range, and I only lasted 11 years. The years I could remember were grueling and relentless, and when I returned Starside, my guide suggested that I had unconsciously caused my leukemia just so I could get back home because my illness and early death had not been written into my life plan. The soaring peaks of the Andes, although a beautiful image, was not welcome in my mind's eye as I sat before the hierarchy, and I flushed it with a heavy blink. It took less than a second for my awareness to return, and then I let my eyes slowly wander the room. I was not in a standard briefing room, and the personnel usually responsible for planning had been dismissed. I assumed the expectation was that I would feel honoured, but I didn't. I hated the place. Not the building, but what went on inside. All those planning their next life enter the building with a preconceived expectation and then exit with a concrete plan and a tentative execution date. All souls are required to pick up where they left off. Sometimes the appropriate pregnancy took years to arise, and other times just days or weeks, and the wait could be filled with dread or stoic anticipation. The view from the Department of Planning was of planet Earth orbiting way too close for comfort, but I knew the view could be whatever I wanted it to be. I looked towards the window and focused my attention. I envisioned the Venetian lagoon I had once called home. In response, flat-bottom rowing boats could now be seen being punted by dashing young gondoliers singing Old Solo Mio. Alusha immediately embellished my scene by stripping the gondoliers of clothes and endowing them each with only a tiny fig leaf. This made me laugh. Alusha possessed a puritanical veneer, but a devilish sense of humour. Even Cain laughed, but his comportment reverted to the banal when he could tell my laughter might turn to hysteria. Melchizedek looked on, amused but non-committal. Alusha's glassy green eyes were her finest feature. She knew I was surveying her, and with several delicate movements of her head, she allowed me to examine her profile. Alusha, 6 foot tall, toned and with a 24-inch waist, had a long neck and a taut jawline. Her auburn ringlets cascaded into her décolletage, which was almost always on permanent display. Alusha's current pre-Raphaelite attire was spot on, a cream silk demonia gown ruched with flared sleeves. The ivory chair she sat on was carved to look like a throne. Very camp, I thought. "Would you like something to drink, Sarah?" she asked with a twinkle in her eye. "Something a little stronger?" I'm aware of the context I'm in, Alusha, thank you, but I think if I wanted a stiff drink, I'm quite capable of creating one. Alusha's suggestion unnerved me for a second time, the notion that I might need a drink to down a cocktail to deal with what was happening, but I knew she hadn't meant anything by it. I was merely on the defensive, as usual, when I was in this company. Alusha averted her eyes. She liked me, but I was temperamental and one of the few able to catch her off guard. I took chances in conversation that she was too polite to. I focused my thoughts, and a margarita with a tequila float decorated with half a slice of lime secured to the salt-encrusted rim appeared in front of her. "Cheers," I said. "I think that it is you who might be needing a drink today." For the first time since the meeting began, I looked directly at Melchizedek. He appeared unmoved by my antics, but his nonchalance felt a smidgen contrived, pricking my already heightened senses to the point where I went from feeling defensive to vaguely paranoid. "I'm not going to do anything I don't want to do, and you won't be able to persuade me. I felt for that once before, and it won't happen again." "That is not how I would describe it exactly, but let's stay focused. I'm not here to persuade you of anything, just encourage you. You are a level 10 now, halfway through, and so not far from graduating. Indeed, if you had not been so languid in thought, word and deed, you might have already done so. Meaning? Meaning, Sarah, that if you would make a more vigilant attempt at remaining focused, you would not be tossed around in the sea of unconsciousness that has sucked you under so many times. An undisciplined mind brings manifestations better avoided to life, and the karmic consequences, as you well know, can be rather stiff. The consequences being endless and prolonged trips back to Earth, a place where every soul would invariably choke on their self-inflicted despair without realising their own minds had caused the entire spectacle. Our eyes locked. His were doe-like and benevolent. I hoped mine would turn to stone. I hated the way he condescended to me. "Sarah, participating souls have been revisiting Earth in order to develop their consciousness for a very long time now. All souls are destined to make use of a power far beyond what has previously been conceived. Karmic burdens notwithstanding, many are now on the tail end of the Earth journey and ready to experience subjectively just how powerful their minds are." "That's nice," I said, shrugging. "What's this got to do with me?" "You know very well what this has to do with you. Your antipathy towards all things Earth does not exempt you from honouring your agreement." Your antipathy towards all things Earth. Fuck that. Back then I had no idea what I was signing up for. I felt like throwing the candlestick at Melchizedek's temple. Alusha twirled a lock of hair, which I found irritating, and Cain averted his eyes, as if looking directly at me might cause him to break out in hives. He then pushed Alusha's margarita towards me. "I guess it is you who will be needing a stiff drink after all." "Cheers," I said, knocking the drink back. I then refocused my attention on creating another cocktail, but this time the glass was enormous, holding 10 gallons of the lime green liquid and blocking Cain from my view. I reorganised my thoughts and soon envisioned a packet of Marlboro, a lighter and an ashtray. I lit a cigarette, inhaled deeply, and then jettisoned the smoke straight towards Cain's nostrils. Cain did not flinch, an obvious attempt to strip me of satisfaction. Melchizedek had already focused his attention on the enormous glass I had created. The molecular structure began to break down, the decomposition of its physical form converting back into translucent vibrating energy, which then disappeared entirely. It was quite a show. The Godson then extinguished my Venetian scene so that once again I was forced to look at planet Earth, orbiting within the immensity of the starlit backdrop, somehow both ugly and splendourous. "Now, if you've had enough of your juvenile tricks," said Melchizedek, "can we get down to business? You might have all the time in the world, but I have the very weight of it on my shoulders." "That's your problem, not mine. Don't bitch to me." I knew I was pushing my luck now. I quickly closed my eyes and focused on the pleasant melody of panpipes in order to centre my awareness. Cain immediately reattuned his thoughts and lowered the music to confirm that being sidetracked was no longer an option. I was tempted to offset his impudence with a set of counteractive thoughts, Then the stony look on his face prevented me from giving way to my impetuous nature. I wanted to get up and leave, but I wouldn't have made it to the elevator. I knew it was time to shut up and listen. Melchizedek nodded towards the window. Sarah, the world out there that you loathe so much is entering a new phase of existence. The inhabitants are due to become aware of who and what they are, where they came from, and what they can expect from themselves. And as this new cycle comes to pass, man's backlog of karma will be extinguished. As I speak, Thaddeus and his team are working very hard to wipe the slate clean. Thaddeus, who I knew well, headed the Department of Weather Management. The so-called freakish weather that has always been the cause of so much concern on planet Earth was just a phenomenon of the divine decree, systematically delivered to all those whose souls, who, prior to being born, chose to balance their karma or to submit to a highly rigorous experience without the necessity of human involvement. Send my love to Thaddeus. You gave me a really shitty job. I hope you know that. He doesn't like doing it. Thaddeus does what he must. We all do. I will send him your best. Now, please let me continue. Sarah, your mind, like that of the average human, is slack and unfocused, and what your mind manifests is, of course, equally slack and equally unfocused. You must revisit Earth to perfect your focus, and as I said, you agreed to do this on the day of your inauguration. I had no idea what was required, none of us did, and you know it. I once again reconfigured the view of Melchizedek's precious Earth. Soon an agitated baboon was peering through the window, and then he turned his back, so all that could be seen was his very large and very dirty rear end. That is very lovely, said Alusha. I found being a baboon quite an invigorating experience. Melchizedek laughed. Me too. Cain was not laughing. He looked at me with expectant eyes, waiting for a question or perhaps just acknowledgement that what had been said so far was sinking in. All I wanted to say was blah, 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 but instead I just shrugged. Please don't wait for me to respond. I have nothing constructive to say. Your input is important to us. Oh, please. I faked an exaggerated yawn, tapping my fingers over my mouth for added effect. This did not deter Cain, who picked up where Melchizedek left off. Yes, I am bored too. Everyone is. Man has caused his own problems through his failure to harness his thoughts, and he will be required to remedy this. Countless souls have spent millennia traipsing back and forth to Earth to face the karma their negative actions have ultimately given rise to. I was certainly bored by everything planet Earth, but I didn't respond. What was the point? Cain continued. To return Starside is to be reacquainted with the Godson's plan, but wouldn't it be nice for participating souls to understand this while in the physical? Not only understand superficially, but really understand fully and concisely, considering everything the Earth journey implies. To understand that one has been created in God's image is the most significant piece of spiritual knowledge one could possibly absorb. Don't you agree? I shrugged. Whether I agree or not is none of your business. My response had no effect. Sarah, Earth is a physical environment displaying singular and collective manifestations of what were once thoughts. Earth is a... I know exactly what Earth is, I said, interrupting Cain with a snarl. It's a horrible, sordid little place, and I can't stand it there. What he was saying was that this horrid little planet that I could not stand was a training ground, a stage for mental construction. Human beings possess the ultimate power, the power to call forth their visualizations from the unseen. But most just thought their beliefs, desires and intentions took the form of a bundle of private thoughts that flushed through without meaning or repercussion. But just thinking about the consequences of thought began to sabotage the equilibrium I was determined to maintain. So I quickly focused my attention, hoping I could still stand my ground. I narrowed my eyes slightly and turned my head towards Melchizedek. Well, my darling M, endowing your creations with free will and then plopping them in a world where the anti-force constantly seduces everyone not strong enough to overcome it was your idea, not mine. You should have thought about the implications of that lethal mixture before sanctioning it. I know I would have done. Would you now? Yes, I said sarcastically. But I know you would never let my opinion deter you from your intentions. And what do you think my intentions are? To set the record straight at all costs. You know me very well, don't you? Melchizedek's expression was one of amusement, and the knowing in his eye suggested he held a great secret which, from all that I had come to know, involved the zenith of the creation story itself. I smiled at him. He met my smile with his own. I record my life as Mary Magdalene, and his as the carpenter's son. I, along with my mother and sister, had watched him preach many times. He had held a special consideration for women and children, and encouraged us to stand at the front while the pious men balked at the back. He was a friend to every sinner, charming the crowds and irking the authorities. He had been a rebel and an agitator. He had been electrifying. My eyes swept the faces of those sitting in front of me. All, it seemed, had taken a trip down memory lane. Cain had been John the Baptizer and unceremoniously lost his head at the hands of the Romans. Cain turned to Melchizedek and reminded him, with the tone of an affectionate rival, that at least his death had been quicker than the crucifixion. Melchizedek roared with laughter. As you well know, I left my body before the bitter end. I hovered for hours, all the conjecture that I felt torrents of pain as I took my last breath with nonsense. Like most in transit, I felt very little, and just watched the debacle from above. Hundreds of us met our end that day on the hill, thieves, murderers, and a few dissidents. It was all a bit of a party as we made our way home, only those left behind did not see it that way. I resented Melchizedek's cavalier remembrance of an event, although written into my life plan, I'd had the misfortune to witness. I was at the master's feet when he was killed. Nothing could have prepared me for the revulsion of what capital punishment consisted of back then. A public circus that assaulted the senses of the victims and their family members. While the Roman sadists gripped their iron clubs and snickered, I kept my eyes closed. But the smell of blood and sweat, united with the heat and the flies, amid unending screams for mercy from the rows of naked men, was a horror show that made my existence thereafter extremely difficult to bear. After returning Starside, I had to spend months recuperating, months coming to terms with the trauma. I didn't see the humour in any of it. Again, I had to refocus my attention in order to deal with the present moment, but I was getting weary of this mental seesawing. So, let me have it then. Explain to me exactly what you require of me. My voice was low and my diction slow, and I had to move my head from left to right because my neck muscles had begun to crick. Melchizedek nodded and took in a deep breath, and then said, "Like everyone else on the journey, your assignment is to consciously deny the anti-force in order to manifest a life of your choosing. Once you are able to do this with reasonable degree of proficiency, your assignment will become evident." Assignment? Bloody assignment! Alusha and Cain were unmoved by my tone, obviously confident that I could handle whatever blows came my way. Melchizedek continued, "Your assignment is something you must arrive at. It's the same for all of us. What I can tell you is this. You must be reacquainted with all those still struggling with their thought forms. There are many souls enduring their self-imposed nightmares, many of whom are already in place. You will join them." I recoiled as my imagination sent speculative images of what that could possibly mean straight to the forefront of my mind's eye, but I sensed the images were too real to be fiction. I saw a sea of forlorn faces, strangers. Some were cooking, scowls upon their faces, and others were driving too fast in the rain and not caring. Others were teachers deriding their pupils, and others were drinking alcohol and numbing themselves. One man with sores on his arms was sitting in the gutter screaming. I was in the car with 2 other people speeding away from him, but I wanted to help. Alusha quickly noticed how distressed I had become and was also quick to respond. "Just take a deep breath, Sarah, and refocus your mind," she said in a semi-stern but hypnotic tone of voice. "Turn your emotions back into thought forms and allow them to pass through your awareness. Good. Breathe deeply while allowing your imagination to recede. Very good. Now you are in control." My mind had decluttered, and I nodded a small thank you at Alusha. "You're welcome," she said, then turned to Melchizedek, who was indifferent to my plight. Sarah, your childhood will be brutal. You will witness the psyches of many people. There will be constant scene changes, and many players will be introduced to you for the single purpose of exposure to the scope and range of human emotion. This will occur during the early part of your life, but I think it's best the details remain undisclosed. I'll bet you do. Melchizedek added more scribble to the parchment in front of him before continuing. You will accrue familiarity until we feel the necessary saturation has occurred. At this point, you will feel your consciousness shift, and you will be summoned once again. This will be a time of great elation, but also great confusion. The arrangement of this meeting will be configured in your absence, but rest assured, one way or the other, you will hear from us when the time is right. I felt the walls closing in, and it hurt to swallow. My head was pounding and my heartbeat matched. I tried to keep my mind empty, but could not stop the memory of a succession of hideous lifetimes from uploading into my mind. 2 in Mississippi were lodged in my immediate awareness. It was there that I had wanted to experience the conditions that would allow me to defer my needs in favour of the needs of others. I wanted to experiment with the concept of complete selflessness, a virtue of light that I had hoped would catapult me to the next place of learning. I was an attractive woman in both lifetimes, a servant, but the master of the house in the first lifetime had not met the moral potential hoped for, and his penchant for deviance once again got the better of him. He made me do things I did not want to do. I threw hot wax in his eyes one night and jumped off the roof shortly after. Immediately upon my return Starside, I was detained in the holding halls before being sent back in utero for breaking the cardinal rule. Suicide does not bring reprieve from any type of emotional discomfort. My memory was once again expunged, and I was born on a cotton plantation near the banks of the Mississippi River. This time my owner was more congenial. After making spiritual headway, I died of pneumonia at the age of 33 and was very happy about it. Cain's words brought me back to the present moment. I understand that the conditions on planet Earth are often difficult to endure, but you really should have graduated by now. I'm not judging you, there is no right or wrong, but in your case it is getting tedious to watch. Just think, you now have the opportunities to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, uphold the agreement you cannot back out of, and live consciously. I would have kicked Cain in the groin given half a chance, but instead I turned my attention back to Melchizedek, the creator and the created, a being who had subjectively experienced everything mankind had ever or would ever experience. But how he could expect us to endure that same horrifying journey with the same tacit complicity was something I had never understood. I took another sip of my cocktail and lit a cigarette. The background music had changed. As Jacob with travel was weary one day had replaced the panpipes. Alusha smiled at me. She had brought to life the hymn with a musical accompaniment that played softly all around us. Come, let us ascend, or may climb it who will, for the angels of Jacob are guarding it still. I knew what Jacob must have felt like. Weary did sum up the human journey. But then what human beings were evolving into did require training of such staggering diversity that it was almost justifiable. Almost. No one spoke because there was little else to say. I continued to adjust to what would be. The hierarchy had finally gotten to me. I would be reborn. I had no power to stop the inevitable. I was heading down a one-way street named Comply. I knew I had to go physical again at some point, and the gap between lifetimes had been, whether I liked it or not, long enough. The hierarchy sat patiently, waiting for me to raise another objection, but I didn't. It was pointless. How could I decline what I was required to agree to by virtue of that overarching agreement? "There will be some nice little perks in this new lifetime of yours," said Cain, obviously expecting this would jolly me along. I found his incentive vulgar, but I did not counter. I knew it wouldn't change anything, and I also knew the meeting was about to reach its conclusion. I allowed my eyes to wander the room, stark and enormous with no visible ceiling. The bookshelves of crisp white onyx soared until they were but a blur, perhaps soaring to infinity. My immediate fate was being sealed in the room that housed the arcane records, a formal chronicle of the inner world of man, every thought and every intent, no matter how fleeting or trivial. A group of beings known as the Keepers tallied on the floors below, keeping the records recent. I tried to recall whether I had ever met a Keeper, but I could not. They were an elusive bunch. I saw Melchizedek rest his gaze on a high shelf behind me. I did not need to turn my head to know that a spindle had dislodged from the others nesting alongside it, uncurling as it floated towards us. An unnecessary show because it could have instantly materialized on the table without fanfare. I turned to see the minor spectacle anyway, which was like watching a feather descend. After the spindle landed on the table, I could see my name on the top parchment next to the date of my inauguration. Melchizedek pulled the scroll toward him and flattened it. He then placed a new parchment on the top of the existing stack. The Godson rested his eyes firmly on me, and a few seconds passed before he said, "And so it is decreed." A pewter dish of red wax appeared on the table with a chunky gold ring. Without taking his eyes off me, Melchizedek leaned forward and slipped the ring on his right index finger, which he then dunked into the wax. The newly sealed and updated parchment, along with the mother's scroll, floated back to the shelf that had been housing it for as long as I had been alive. Formality now dispensed with, Melchizedek focused his attention and brought to life a silver goblet containing a milky concoction. He picked up the goblet with both hands and uttered, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done," before passing it to me. The sacrament was underway, and it wouldn't be long before I too would feel the pure energy of the divine course through me. I took a very large sip, breaching etiquette. Instantaneously, fear and doubt were replaced by a feeling of serenity that accelerated into a euphoric empowerment so supreme that I felt alive and invincible and impervious to any type of base emotion. I paid a great deal of attention to these feelings because I knew they wouldn't last. For now, though, my consciousness was that of the ascended, a consciousness of confidence and bliss the hierarchy felt all the time. I went to take another sip of the rejuvenating liquid, but the goblet dematerialized before my hand could reach it. I laughed, and so did the hierarchy. Humour, the divine equalizer, had created another moment in time I would fondly remember. Alucia smiled and Kane nodded, which meant the meeting was now over, and both stood in unison, pushing their chairs under the table. I watched them walk towards the elevator, keeping their backs to us, saying nothing. The doors opened and closed, sealing them in. I was happy that Kane was gone. I then looked at Melchizedek and said, "Now it is just thee and me." Our eyes remained locked for a comfortably long moment, until I noticed the beginnings of a grin form on the Godson's face. "I have a surprise for you, Sarah. Will you come with me?" I considered his request, but then realised that was pointless. "I guess. Where to?" "Inauguration Hall. I'm officiating and I'd like you to be present." "Shouldn't I be heading off to the Department of Planning? A few short minutes ago you could think of little else." "Don't worry, this won't take long," said Melchizedek, gesturing with a nod for me to accompany him to the elevator.